Snow fell across the ruined battlefield, covering the ground in white silence, but the silence was broken by the distant echoes of screams and growls. The war had come without warning. No one in the galaxy had expected the monsters to rise from the dark corners of space. They were not an army like others had faced before. They were a living storm, creatures of teeth and claws, shadows and nightmares. Entire colonies were overrun within days, their cities swallowed by waves of monstrous beasts that seemed endless. Among the chaos was a girl, not human, but alien, born from a proud people who had ruled their world for centuries. She had silver hair that glowed faintly under the pale sky, and armor that shimmered like frozen steel. Her name was whispered by her people, but on this day, she was no longer seen as a warrior. She was only prey. Her clan had fought bravely, but when the tide of monsters grew too strong, they made a choice she never imagined. She was wounded, slower than the others, and instead of lifting her up, they abandoned her. She will only hold us back, they said. With one last look of pity, they turned away, leaving her behind as the beasts closed in. The girl crawled across the snow, her breath shallow, her body trembling. The roar of the creatures shook the air, and their shadows circled closer. Her heart pounded with fear. Every instinct told her that this was the end. She pressed her hand against the snow and whispered to herself, not in strength, but in despair. No warrior's vow, no proud cry, just a broken whisper. I don't want to die here. But fate had other plans. Through the haze of the storm, another figure moved across the battlefield. Not a beast, not one of her clan, but a lone human. His armor was scratched and dirty, his rifle almost out of power, but his eyes burned with something she had never seen in her own people. He did not look at her as a burden. He looked at her as someone worth saving. The monsters lunged first. The human raised his weapon and fired, each shot a flash of light that tore through the shadows. The girl watched in disbelief. He fought, not for himself, but to reach her. He stood where her own people had abandoned her. Every pull of the trigger, every swing of his blade, was a defiance of the fate she had been given. The beasts surrounded him, snarling and snapping, but the human never stepped back. He planted his feet in the snow as if the entire world rested on that line he refused to cross. His voice rang out, a roar against the howls of the monsters. You will not take her. Something inside the alien girl stirred. Her people had told her humans were weak, fragile, short-lived creatures of flesh. Yet here he stood, bleeding and exhausted, and still refusing to leave her. For the first time since the war began, she felt something stronger than fear-hope. The human reached her side at last. His hand extended, rough and warm despite the cold. She hesitated, staring at him, wondering why he would risk everything for a stranger. But his eyes were clear, filled with determination that left no room for doubt. She placed her trembling hand in his, and in that moment, her fate changed. Together they moved, the human pulling her to her feet. The girl stumbled, her armor heavy, her body weak, but his grip never let go. The monsters came again, a flood of teeth and claws tearing through the snow. The human pressed her behind him and raised his weapon once more. She watched as he fought with everything he had left, every strike a message. You are not alone. The snow turned red, the air filled with roars, but still he fought. The girl's heart raced, not from fear this time, but from something she could not explain. This human, this stranger, had chosen to defy fate itself, and though the monsters closed in, though the world around them seemed ready to end, she realized she was no longer abandoned. She was no longer prey. For the first time in her life, she believed she might survive. The war was not over. The monsters would not stop. But with the human by her side, she felt the impossible. She felt unbreakable. The night came fast over the frozen land. The girl and the human found themselves surrounded not only by silence, but by the heavy weight of survival. Every sound, every gust of wind carried the threat of monsters still lurking in the shadows. The battlefield they had. Escape was only the beginning. The human pulled her along carefully, his steps steady despite the blood that stained his armor. His weapon was almost useless now, power cells nearly empty. Still, he moved with the same resolve he had shown when he first saved her. She could barely walk, every muscle weak, but his arm supported her, holding her up against the biting cold. The girl could not understand him. His words were strange, filled with a tongue her people had never bothered to learn. Yet she could read his intent in his face. He was not leaving her behind. That truth burned stronger than any spoken language. They found a hollow beneath a broken ridge of ice where the wind was less cruel. The human guided her there, lowered her gently against the frozen wall, and began working on a small fire using what little he carried. Sparks flickered, smoke rose, and soon a dim flame glowed in the darkness. For the first time since the monsters had attacked, warmth touched her skin. The girl watched him closely. His hands shook from exhaustion, his eyes heavy with fatigue. But he did not rest. He tore fabric from his own uniform, wrapping it around her wounds. He poured the last of his water into her mouth, though his lips were cracked with thirst. It made no sense to her. Why would he give everything to protect someone, not even of his kind? She remembered her clan, the way they had turned their backs on her. Strong warriors, proud leaders, all of them abandoning her without hesitation. Yet here was this fragile human, bleeding and tired, refusing to leave her side. Her voice, soft and broken, rose at last. In her own language she whispered. "Why?" The human paused, looking at her as though he understood, though her words meant nothing to him. His answer was only a tired smile, the kind that carried no victory but still gave strength. He tapped his chest with one hand, then pointed at her, as if to say, "Because you matter." The girl lowered her eyes. A warmth spread in her chest, different from the fire. She had never felt it before, not even among her own kind. But the monsters were not gone. The distant howls carried through the snow, echoing across the frozen valley. Their hunt never ended. The human heard them too. He rose, scanning the darkness with sharp eyes. His body swayed with weakness, but he held his weapon ready. The girl felt guilt pressing down on her. She had been raised to believe humans were weak, yet this one stood as her shield while she did nothing. Her people's armor wrapped around her body, but it felt heavy and useless. She clenched her fists, shame mixing with a new spark of determination, that she pushed herself up, ignoring the pain that screamed through her legs. The human turned quickly, trying to motion her back down, but she shook her head. She pressed her hand against her chest and whispered a promise to herself. "I will not be a burden again." The human seemed to understand. He looked at her, studied her resolve, and slowly nodded. Side by side, they waited as the night filled with the sound of approaching beasts. Snow shifted. Shadows moved at the edge of the firelight. The growls grew louder. The girl felt her heart pounding, fear and courage colliding inside her. The human stepped forward, weapon aimed, ready to fight until nothing was left of him. But this time, she would not let him stand alone. She drew a hidden blade from her armor, its surface glowing faintly with the ancient runes of her people. Her hands trembled, but her eyes hardened. She knew she was still weak, still wounded, but if he was willing to defy fate for her, then she would defy it with him. The first monster appeared, its body massive, its eyes burning red in the dark. It snarled, snow scattering beneath its claws. The girl lifted her blade. The human raised his rifle, and together they faced the nightmare. For the first time since the war began, she did not feel abandoned. She did not feel helpless. She was no longer left to perish. The monsters charged. The night erupted in fire, steel, and roars. The battle in the snow was chaos. The fire crackled weakly behind them as the beasts charged forward, their monstrous shapes tearing through the darkness. The human fired until his rifle spat only sparks, then he switched to a steel blade at his side. The alien girl swung her glowing weapon with trembling hands, its runes burning brighter with every strike. The first creature fell, its body collapsing into the snow with a hiss. But more came, snarling and circling them like wolves. The girl stumbled, fear gripping her again. One beast lunged toward her, jaws wide, but the human intercepted, driving his blade deep into its chest. Blood sprayed, staining the snow black. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. He nodded at her, as if telling her she was not weak, not anymore. The girl's breath steadied, and she tightened her grip on her blade. Together they fought, every step in rhythm, every strike an act of survival. The monsters were strong, but they were not endless. At last, after what felt like hours, the final beast fell into silence. The night became still again, broken only by their gasping breaths and the faint crackle of the fire. The girl collapsed to her knees, exhaustion heavier than her armor. Her blade dimmed as the runes cooled, and her arms shook. She had fought, but it was the human who had carried them. Both through. He dropped down beside her, just as drained, blood dripping from fresh wounds across his arms. For a long while, they sat in silence. The human tilted his head back, staring at the sky filled with strange stars. The girl followed his gaze. It was strange to think that above them stretched endless worlds, and yet here they were, two broken lives on a frozen battlefield, clinging to survival. The girl whispered in her own tongue again, her voice soft. "We cannot keep running." The human turned his eyes to her. He didn't understand the words, but he seemed to understand the meaning. His jaw tightened, his expression grim but unbroken. He touched his chest again, then gestured outward to the horizon, as if to say, "We move forward. Together." The girl lowered her eyes, her heart tightening. She had been taught all her life that humans were fragile, unworthy of trust. Yet this one showed her more courage than her strongest warriors. He had every reason to abandon her, but instead he gave her hope. When dawn broke, they left the hollow behind. The snowstorm had cleared, and in the distance, the mountains rose like jagged teeth against the pale sky. Somewhere beyond them, there might be shelter. Or maybe more monsters. Neither of them knew. The journey was harsh. The girl limped, her wounds slowing her down, but the human never complained. He shared the little food he had left, breaking it in half even when it meant leaving almost nothing for himself. He steadied her when she slipped on the ice, caught her when her legs nearly gave out. As they traveled, the girl began to study him more closely. His face was lined with fatigue, but his eyes held fire. He moved with purpose, always watching, always alert, as though he carried the weight of both their lives without hesitation. She thought of her people again, the ones who had left her behind. They had strength in numbers, ships, weapons, and armies. Yet they had abandoned her because she was weak. This lone human, weaker than all of them in body, had chosen instead to carry her forward. At night, when they rested in shallow caves or under the cover of snowdrifts, the girl would sometimes whisper small fragments of her story. She spoke of her clan, of the betrayal, of the monsters that had torn her world apart. She did not know if he understood. Still he listened, his eyes never leaving her, his silence steady and patient. One night, as the firelight flickered between them, she noticed his hands trembling, not from cold, but from pain. His wounds had worsened, blood seeping through the makeshift bandages. He hid it well, always standing guard, always shielding her. But she could see now that he was breaking. Her chest tightened with guilt. She reached for his arm, stopping him from rising when he tried to move. He looked at her in surprise. Slowly, she tore a strip of cloth from her own armor and began binding his wound. Her hands shook, unused to such tasks, but her determination was clear. The human blinked, then gave her that same tired smile, the one that said more than words could. For the first time, she smiled back. It was small, faint, but real. The bond between them grew with every step, forged in blood and survival. She was no longer simply a girl abandoned by her people. And he was no longer simply a soldier, lost in the snow. Together, they were something different, something stronger. But the monsters were never far. Their roars echoed again across the mountains, closer than before. The girl's heart pounded as she realized the truth. The hunt would not end until either she or the human fell, and she refused to let it be him. The mountains rose higher with each step, their sharp edges cutting into the pale sky. The human and the alien girl pushed forward through the snow, their breaths heavy, their bodies carrying the weight of exhaustion. Each step felt like a battle of its own, but neither of them spoke of giving up. By now, the girl could see the truth she had once denied. This human was not only her savior, he was her shield, her strength, and strangely, her anchor in a world that had abandoned her. But he was faltering. She noticed it in the way his steps dragged, in the way he sometimes leaned against the rocks. When he thought she wasn't watching, the human had wounds that no strip of cloth could truly heal. Blood still seeped slowly through his bandages. His lips were pale, his voice rough with pain. Yet he kept moving, refusing to rest for too long, refusing to show weakness in front of her. That night, they found a cave carved into the mountainside. The walls shimmered faintly with crystals, catching the glow of the small fire he managed to build. The girl sat across from him, watching his every movement. He worked with stiff hands, setting stones to block the entrance, as if preparing for another attack. "You are breaking," she whispered in her language, her voice carrying both fear and frustration. He looked up at her. He did not understand the words, but her eyes told him enough. He gave her the same answer as always, a faint smile and silence. The girl clenched her fists. She hated that smile. It was too calm, too willing to suffer for her sake. She had been raised to see humans as fragile creatures, yet he was the one carrying her forward. She had been raised to see herself as strong, yet she had done nothing but slow him down. As the fire flickered, she rose and walked to his side. Her blade lay across her lap, glowing faintly with the runes of her people. She studied the weapon for a moment, then looked at him. "No more," she said, her voice firm, though she knew he could not understand. "You cannot fight alone. I will not let you." The human studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly he nodded. He handed her a small dagger from his belt, pressing it into her hands. It was old, the edge worn, but she held it like a promise. For the first time since the war began, she felt she was more than just someone to be saved. The howls came again. That night, louder, closer, the monsters had followed them into the mountains. Their shadows stretched across the snow outside the cave, massive bodies moving in the dark. The girl's breath caught as she saw their glowing eyes through the cracks. In the stones, the human stood, his blade ready, his body shaking with fatigue. But before he could step forward, the girl rose beside him, her runed weapon blazing brighter than before. She planted her feet at his side, meeting his gaze. When the stones at the entrance burst apart and the beasts poured in, they fought together. The human strikes were quick and precise, every move made to protect her, but this time she matched him. Her blade sang through the air, carving glowing arcs that burned into the monster's flesh. Her fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. One creature leapt at her, its jaws wide, but she spun, driving her blade deep into its chest. The impact shook her, but she did not fall. She pushed the beast back, its body crashing into the cave wall with a sickening thud. The human glanced at her, surprise flashing across his face, followed by pride. The fight was brutal. The cave echoed with snarls and the clash of steel. Blood stained the crystal walls, glowing faintly under the light of the fire. The girl's arms ached, her body screamed, but she refused to stop. Every strike, every movement, was for him, the human who had given her hope. When the last beast fell, silence filled the cave once more. The girl's chest heaved, her blade dripping dark blood. The human lowered his weapon, his body swaying. Dangerously, she rushed to his side, catching him before he collapsed. His weight pressed against her, heavy and real, but she held him tightly. "You will not die," she whispered fiercely. "Not while I live." She laid him gently by the fire, her hands trembling as she checked his wounds. He was burning with fever now, his strength nearly gone. He opened his eyes, barely able to focus on her, but he smiled that same tired smile again. Tears stung her eyes. For the first time, she realized how close she was to losing him. And the thought tore through her more deeply than any wound ever could. The girl pressed her forehead against his, her voice breaking. "You saved me when no one else would. Now I will save you. I swear it." The night passed with her sitting guard, her blade across her knees, her eyes never leaving the shadows outside the cave. She was no longer just a girl abandoned to die. She was a warrior, and she had someone worth fighting for. The human's fever grew worse as the days passed. His body, once strong and unshaken, now trembled with every breath. The girl stayed close, tending to him with what little she knew, using herbs from the frozen valleys and wrapping his wounds. Again and again. But no matter what she did, the infection spread. His face grew pale, his lips dry, and yet his eyes never lost their fire. Whenever he opened them, he still looked at her with the same silent promise. "Don't give up." She refused to. The girl carried him when his legs could no longer bear weight. She dragged him across the snow, step by painful step, her body burning with exhaustion, but her spirit unbroken. He had saved her when she was too weak to stand. Now it was her turn. The mountain stretched endlessly, cruel and sharp, but she pressed on. Sometimes she saw shadows moving on the ridges, monsters stalking, waiting. They never gave up the hunt. The beasts seemed to sense that the human was faltering, and they hungered for the kill. One evening, the girl spotted smoke rising from far beyond the ridges. At first she thought it was her imagination, a trick of light and exhaustion. But when she looked again, it was real. Somewhere beyond the peaks there was fire, and where there was fire, there was life. Hope surged through her veins. She shook the human gently, pointing toward the distant smoke. He opened his eyes halfway, gave a weak nod, and closed them again. The girl whispered, "Hold on, I will take you there." The journey was merciless. She had no food left, no water, only the strength of her will. Her back ached from carrying him, her feet bled from the frozen ground, but every step was a vow. She would not let him die here. Not after everything he had done. At night, when they sheltered in shallow caves, she spoke to him softly. She told him stories of her people, of the mountains where she was born, of the rivers that once shone like silver under twin moons. She told him things she had never spoken to anyone else, as if the words themselves kept him alive. Sometimes, when he stirred, he would answer in his own language, his voice weak but steady. She did not understand the words, but she understood the feeling. He was telling her that he trusted her, that he believed in her, but the monsters never stopped. On the fourth night, they attacked again. The girl woke to the sound of snarls and the stink of blood. She rose quickly, blade in hand, her body screaming with fatigue, but her spirit sharp with fury. The beasts lunged from the darkness, their claws scraping against the rocks. She stood her ground, her blade glowing bright as she met them head-on. Her arms ached, her legs shook, but every strike was fueled by the memory of the human shielding her, refusing to abandon her. "You will not take him," she shouted in her own tongue, her voice echoing through the mountains. Her blade cut through the night, glowing arcs of light that carved into the beasts. They fell one by one, but each death seemed to call another. She fought until her breath came in ragged gasps, until her arms felt like stone. When the last monster collapsed, the girl stumbled back to the human side. He was awake, his eyes faintly open, watching her. For the first time, he saw her not as the one being saved, but as the warrior standing between him and death. She dropped to her knees beside him, tears stinging her eyes. "I will not let them have you," she whispered. The human reached up with a trembling hand, brushing his fingers against hers. His voice was faint, broken, but she understood the meaning. "I trust you." The girl bowed her head, her heart torn between fear and determination. She knew the monsters would keep coming. She knew time was slipping away. The human's life was fading like the last embers of a fire. And yet, for the first time in her life, she felt more than fear. She felt something stronger, something unshakable. She loved him. The realization struck her like lightning, fierce and undeniable. She had been abandoned by her own people, left to die among monsters, but this human had given her something greater than survival. He had given her hope, courage, and now he had given her a reason to fight beyond herself. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered to him, her voice trembling, "You will live, I swear it, even if it costs me everything." The night passed in silence, broken only by the sound of the human's shallow breaths and the distant howls of the beast still hunting. And as dawn rose over the frozen mountains, the girl rose too, her blade glowing brighter than ever before. She would face them all. She would not let him die. Asterisk. The dawn was pale and cold as the girl carried the human higher into the mountains. His body felt lighter, now not from strength, but from weakness. His breath was shallow, his skin burning with fever. Yet his eyes opened every so often, always finding her, always reminding her why she kept moving. The smoke she had seen days ago was closer now. With each step, she prayed it meant shelter, perhaps even survivors. But the monsters knew she was near their prey. Their howls rose behind her, echoing across the frozen cliffs, growing closer with every heartbeat. Her legs shook, her wounds ached, but she pressed on. When at last she reached the top of a ridge, she saw it, a small human outpost, half buried in snow, but alive. Faint lights glimmered through the storm, and movement stirred near its gates. Relief swept through her. But it was short-lived. A roar shattered the sky. From the shadows of the valley below, a massive beast emerged larger than any she had faced before. Its body was a mountain of claws and teeth, its eyes glowing like fire. The smaller beasts scattered around it, their snarls trembling with hunger. The girl's heart froze. She knew she could not outrun it. The human in her arms stirred faintly, his lips moving. His words were soft, broken, but she understood the meaning. "Leave me. Run." Her eyes filled with tears. "No," she whispered fiercely. "Never." She laid him gently against a stone, brushing her hand across his face. Then she rose, her ruined blade burning bright in her hands. For the first time, she did not feel fear. She felt fire. The great beast thundered forward, shaking the ground with every step. The girl planted her feet, her silver hair whipping in the wind, her eyes blazing with resolve. Behind her, the human's weak gaze never left her, watching. As she stood alone between him and death, the monster lunged, its roar splitting the air. The girl met it head-on, her blade flashing like lightning. The runes blazed with power as she struck, her voice echoing with fury and love. "You will not take him." The clash shook the ridge. Her blade carved into the beast's flesh, spilling black blood across the snow. It roared and swiped, its claws tearing into her armor, knocking her back, but she rose again, her body burning with pain yet refusing to fall. The smaller monsters rushed in, but her strikes cut them down. She fought like fire, every swing of her blade fueled by the memory of his smile, his courage, his choice to save her when no one else would. She had been left to perish among monsters, but now she was the one who defied fate. The great beast charged again, jaws wide, but this time she did not retreat. She drove her blade straight into its chest, the runes exploding with light. A shockwave burst across the ridge, throwing snow and stone into the air. The monster roared one last time, before collapsing into silence, its body shaking the ground as it fell. The valley grew quiet. The remaining beasts fled into the shadows, their courage broken. The girl stood trembling, her blade glowing faintly, her armor cracked and bleeding. She swayed, her strength nearly gone, but she forced her feet to carry her back to the human. Lay where she had left him, his eyes half open, his breath shallow. She dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her forehead against his. Her voice broke into tears. "It is over. You are safe." The human's hand lifted weakly, brushing against her face. His lips curved into the faintest smile. He whispered something she could not understand, but she felt the meaning deep in her heart. "You saved me." She closed her eyes, tears falling. "No," she whispered. "We saved each other." Moments later, the gates of the human outpost opened, voices shouting, figures rushing toward them. Strong hands lifted the human, carrying him inside. Others tried to help her, but she shook her head, refusing to let go of his hand until she was certain he would live. Inside the walls, warmth returned, medicine was given, and the human's breathing grew steady again. Days later, when he awoke fully, the first thing he saw was her sitting by his side, her silver hair glowing softly in the light, her eyes filled with quiet strength. Neither spoke the other's language, but they did not need to. They had fought together, bled together, and defied death itself. In that bond, no words were necessary. The alien girl had been left to perish among monsters, but a human had defied fate, and together, they had carved a new story, one where hope lived even in the darkest of places. And though the war across the stars was far from over, they both knew this. Whatever battles came, they would not face them alone.